Weirder Stuff. Chapter 1. Madmax. The campfire crackled in the darkness. You and your classmates sat nestled around it, surrounded by a circle of trees. It was lucky that everyone was allowed to go on this camping trip, since Kaminari would not have been here if grades were a factor, and he was one of the best storytellers in the class. The group had taken turns swapping scary stories and bags of marshmallows, enjoying the free time you earned after a strenuous day of training.
That one was so lame!
Bakugo griped at Kirishima's Hitchcock-style tale.
I ain't scared of no birds, man!
Maybe you should be, Tokoyami mumbled, causing you to giggle from the log you were lounging on. I thought it was really great, Kirishima, Midoriya said, complimenting it. He was seated on the ground in front of you, and it was all you could do to not perpetually play with his soft, fluffy hair. Thanks, man. Yeah, that was pretty good, Kaminari grinned. But I bet I can top it. You all blinked at him expectantly. Have you all heard the tale of Madmax?
No.
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 A few of you said in unison, shaking your heads. Well, maybe you remember a few years back on the news about a guy whose quirk was a chainsaw hand. Everyone shrugged and gave him blank looks. True story, he replied. Groundskeepers here kept it under wraps the best they could so they wouldn't lose business. Why? Izuku asked. What happened? Nobody knows for sure. Denki's voice grew low, making the group lean in to listen more intently. But the rumor is that he murdered 12 innocent campers. Your eyes widened. They found someone's body parts floating down the river not that far from here. Wait, parts? Kirishima narrowed his eyes in confusion. Well, you see, it's been said that he kept pieces of the campers. A sick sort of trophy from each of his hunts. Nobody was ever found whole.
I think I'm gonna be sick,
Uraraka said with a grimace. This mad woodsman had a cabin in these hills and would chase his victims into the woods. Kaminari became more expressive with his voices and gestures, leaping towards a queasy-looking Kirishima. You could see Midoriya shrinking towards the log you were sitting on, gripping onto the leg of your pants without thinking. It wasn't until then that you noticed you had been holding your breath. Kaminari digressed. He would toy with them until they were good and lost, as he knew these woods like the back of his hand.
I thought his hand was a chainsaw.
He has another hand.
Shut up, Bakugo.
Then, out of nowhere, the revving of Madmax's chainsaw would come for them, and it would be the last thing they ever hear. You put a hand on Midoriya's hair, but then realized it was more to comfort yourself than him. Wait, if that happened here, where's Madmax now? Kirishima gawked. By the time the police had gathered enough evidence to make an arrest, Madmax was nowhere to be found. A thick, tense silence followed his story before. The noise startled the lot of you, making you jump. You gasped and whipped your head around, only to see Sero approaching with a new bag of marshmallows. The group sighed and groaned.
That was scary.
Sorry, guys. Couldn't resist.
Nice try, you moron.
Katsuki rolled his eyes and Sero frowned at the nickname. Kaminari, on the other hand, offered him a high five for the aptly timed enhancement of his narrative. Izuku huffed a sigh of relief. That was a good story. He turned to look at you, but then realized he was clutching onto your leg. Sorry! He released it and looked at the ground with an embarrassed blush. I mean, I wasn't scared or anything, but it was very compelling. Yeah, I wasn't scared either. You lied, hoping he hadn't noticed the way you caressed his fluffy hair to soothe your nerves.
Yeah, right, traveler.
Bakugo guffawed.
I saw you jump out of your skin a second ago.
You let out a frustrated grunt, but Midoriya was grateful to know that he wasn't the only one put on edge by Kaminari's story. You know, traveler. He scratched the back of his neck bashfully. If you get scared or anything, All right, everyone. Get to bed soon. Aizawa's voice came from around a nearby tree, interrupting Midoriya's invitation. Long day of training tomorrow. The class let out a disappointed, "Man."
Aww.
Well, good night, traveler. Izuku's green eyes met yours.
Sweet dreams, Izuku.
You ruffled his curls before jumping off the back of the log. It was too dark to see the color rise in his freckled cheeks. The boys and the girls each had their own respective campsites on opposite sides of the bonfire. The boys brought most of their own tents from home, whereas Momo had supplied the girls a large deluxe one to share and chat in. It was so luxurious that it practically defeated the purpose of roughing it in the woods. The girls gossiped about the boys and played a truth and lies sort of game, calming the ominous energy that gripped you after Kaminari's tale. You wanted to know if it was true or not, whether or not you should be on guard for any real danger. Too bad there was no way to check the facts until morning, seeing as there was no internet access way out here in the woods. The evening quieted down, and all you heard was the sound of crickets and your roommate's peaceful breathing. It's ridiculous, you told yourself as the night drew on. There's no way the story was true. You've got nothing to worry about. But no matter how much you tried to reason with yourself, you were wide awake, unable to sleep. You tossed and turned, working up a considerable thirst. You tiptoed towards the entrance of the tent, where your canteen resided. Crap. You had forgotten to refill it before getting ready for bed. You bit your lip in apprehension, but realized you definitely wouldn't be able to sleep without it. Deftly, you unzipped the tent, poking your head out just enough to check for possible violent woodsmen. When you were convinced that nothing was lurking, you hustled your way up the hill towards the bathhouse. It was a considerable hike, nearly out of sight of the campground below. You were overtaken by paranoid jitters while you filled your canteen, looking over your shoulder much more often than was probably necessary. What if Kaminari had been right, and there really was a madman about? Here you were alone, in the middle of the night, a prime victim for any crazed villain on the loose. As the water ran into the bottle, a crack and a rustle caught your attention. You immediately turned off the faucet, holding your breath. You didn't have any weapons on your person, short of a few nearby sticks. You crept closer to the corner, planning to surprise the madman with an ambush. You figured that would give you an advantage, and a better chance to escape. A rush of adrenaline spiked in your bloodstream as you awaited the stranger's advance. His footsteps finally reached your position, and you pounced.
Yeah! Woo!
Before you struck, you noticed a familiarity to that scream.
Izuku!
He was on his butt, staring up at you with startled horror. You dropped the stick and helped him to his feet.
Oh, you really scared me, traveler.
He put a hand on his hammering heart, trying to catch his breath.
I'm so sorry.
You felt like an idiot now. Your paranoid delusions almost caused you to whack Midoriya with a big stick.
I just heard a noise and, I didn't know if Kaminari's story was true or not.
Midoriya empathized. He too had sprinted to the bathroom at top speeds, unnerved by the slightest rustle of the woods around him. Don't worry. If something happens, I'm here to protect you. He gave you a crooked smile, still trembling a bit from the nerves.
Thanks, Izuku.
You blushed at the ground.
I feel really silly. I shouldn't still be afraid of scary stories at this age.
No, I understand. He put comforting hands on your shoulders. I thought it was a little scary too. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew it would make you feel better to hear that.
You're just saying that.
You gazed into his emerald eyes, noting how they sparkled in the dark lighting. You're not afraid of anything. You had seen how he acted in hero training and couldn't imagine him ever backing down from a fight. He felt a little clench of pride in his chest.
Everybody's scared of something, traveler.
He rested a hand on your lower back, gently guiding you back towards the campsite.
And I guess getting chopped into pieces by a guy in the woods is as good as any reason to be scared.
He let out a cute chuckle.
Yeah.
You grimaced a bit.
Thanks for the nightmares, Midoriya.
But if you get scared, you can, always come to my tent. He wouldn't look at you while saying that. I might have to take you up on that. You smiled to encourage him. The two of you froze at a sudden noise nearby.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Probably just a deer or something.
But he suddenly had an onset of anxiety from the proximity of the sound. Even he knew deer don't step on sticks that loudly. They're light-footed, with small hooves.
Or a bear?
You offered a slightly less terrifying solution than a lurking murderer. You looked over the hill towards the river, noticing something moving.
Look,
you whispered in hushed tones, pointing Izuku's attention towards the source of the sound. He squinted, and the dark figure came into the moonlight. It was a person, standing at the base of the hill, dark silhouette holding something in his hand.
Mr. Aizawa?
Midoriya called, hoping it was your teacher. The figure turned, having heard him shout.
Izuku.
You gripped his arm.
I don't think that's Aizawa. What's that he's holding?
You and Midoriya yelped in unison. Fear gripped you both, chilling you to the core. That was the sound of a revving chainsaw.
It's Madmax!
You grabbed Izuku by the hand. We have to run! The stranger approached at a slow, torturing pace as you and Midoriya sprinted for your lives.
We have to warn the others! We won't be able to if he catches us first!
Midoriya couldn't argue with that, and followed you, weaving through the trees and uneven terrain.
Maybe we can find a way to ambush him like you did to me, and knock him out. That would give us time to warn Aizawa and the others.
Good idea! You had faith in Midoriya's strategy. He always thrived in crisis situations like these. He led you right back into the bathhouse, locking the door.
Won't this be the first place he'll look?
You looked at Izuku with dread.
Possibly,
he replied, digging in the custodial closet.
But this is the only place we can find things to stop him.
He eyed the shelves full of chemical cleaners and supplies.
Oh, here!
You handed him a pocket knife you had brought with you earlier for safety.
Do you think... Shh!
He covered your mouth and you heard approaching footsteps outside the window. You both held your breath, shaking with fear before they got quieter once more. He sighed with relief.
We need to hurry.
With haste, he tied the knife to the end of a broom, using the closet's duct tape.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do.
He handed you the makeshift weapon.
When he gets close, I'm going to run out as a distraction. Then you take him out. Understand? No, Izuku, that's much too dangerous for you.
You took his hands in yours, eyes pleading.
But I made a promise earlier that I would protect you. We can think of a better plan.
You had been too busy worrying about Izuku that you hadn't kept track of your volume or your surroundings. The stranger heard quiet mumbling inside the bathhouse and walked through the open doors.
What was that?
You covered your own mouth, eyeing Midoriya with absolute horror at how near the footsteps had become. You clutched onto his shoulders and he held you tight.
I don't want to die, Izuku!
Midoriya could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, near frozen in fear when he realized the latch on the closet door was turning.
Oh God! The woodsman has the keys! We're about to get killed!
Huh? The light switch was pulled, and in front of you stood an ordinary-looking man. In his right hand nestled a sizable leaf blower, the source of the chainsaw-like noise. You and Midoriya gawked at him, just beginning to realize that the man who had followed you was not Madmax. Are you guys making out in here?
What?
Midoriya unlatched himself from your body and pulled away.
Who are you?
He asked the stranger. Me? Oh, I'm the groundskeeper. I come out here every day to keep the camp looking nice.
Then, why are you here at night?
You inquired suspiciously. It's 5 in the morning. He shrugged. I like to make a sweep of the perimeter just before sunrise. Both of you felt like irrational children. You had allowed your imaginations to get the better of you and blow your fear out of proportion. You quietly tiptoed in the direction of the campsite, strung out and sleepy. Hand in hand, Midoriya walked you back to your tent in silence, not having any idea what to say at this point. Izuku? You stopped him as he turned to leave. Thanks for protecting me. He knew you were just being polite, as he had performed no actual heroic acts tonight, but smiled anyway. Any time, traveler. Well, good night. Again. You smirked. I guess it would be good morning this time. He took a step forward and you felt inclined to pull him into a warm hug. Then, good morning, Izuku. The gentle kiss you placed on his cheek surely chased away any potential nightmares lurking in his subconscious. Your sleeping bag was so inviting when you got in it. All your classmates were still sleeping soundly by the time you laid down, completely unaware of the events that just ensued. You smiled to yourself, knowing that if something scary were to happen before dawn, you knew exactly whose tent you were going to run to. To be continued.